at HARP. Today we are going to talk about when identity gets
Mm.
destroyed, what gets created. I am Deborah Henson-Conant. I'm here with Kathleen Wiley. I'm a composer and a performer, and Kathleen is a Jungian psychoanalyst. We both play the harp, and that's how we met. And so we call this Jung at HARP. Today and every day, this is a conversation. It's not us coming here and saying, this is how it is, blah, blah, blah. It's a conversation, and it's the art of conversation where we come with a question, not with an answer, and we come to discover from that conversation more about the question and the answers. But the questions are more important than the answers in this case. And the reason we came up with this is I'm in a big sort of shift in my life, in that there's a musical that I've written called The Golden Cage, and it's about to be actually produced in New York City. And it's an important show in my life because I actually had the idea for the show when I was 19. And it's about two different sides of myself, a side that was longing for security and a side that was a longing for freedom and adventure. And I sat down and I was thinking about how would these two, if these I didn't even think if these two became characters, how would they interact? But I was just thinking about what is going to be my life, and they became two characters out of me. And then more recently, as I've sort of lived this story as a map for my life, I keep looking at where am I in the story? And there's a point at which one of the characters falls off of a cliff. And in that moment, her complete identity is destroyed, but her true identity comes through. And I think that that's the part of the story that I'm at right now. It certainly feels like I'm falling off a cliff. And so as we talked this morning, Kathleen and I came to that, and you started describing it in terms of the Jungian
Right.
characteristics, and you started talking about persona. And I would love for you to share just what you shared with me about that part of the story of our lives.
Yeah. You know, we all have faces that we put on and show the world. And in Jungian psychology, the personas that we put on mediate between who we think we are, and the outside world. So we often put on the persona of, harpist, psychoanalyst, entertainer, writer, teacher, whatever, wife, lover. And we need those personas. I mean, personas are not a bad thing. But if we identify with a persona, a role, or an image that our ego alone has created in response to what the ego thinks the outside world wants, or what the ego hears other people saying we should be, how we should look, what we should do, then those personas can very much become a cage because they limit our expression, because we don't go inside and say, okay, but what more is there? Is there some other impulse in me that also wants expression? So, one of the things we have to be willing to give up in order to become whole, WHOLE, which is the goal of individuation, is embodying the full essence we are, is we have to be willing to give up, go with the flow when our identity, our sense of self in the outside world gets destroyed. And when we have to be willing to give up our own ego ideals, i.e., who we think we are. My guess is in the story, the character all of a sudden has to she all of a sudden who she thinks she is and how she experiences herself, and the ego ideal that grows from that is destroyed. She's no longer caged. She
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. And I want to go back to so first of all, I want to ask, why do we need personas? And these two characters there. So the show is about a golden cage, and from the outside, it appears like this beautiful, wonderful, amazing thing. But once you're inside it, if you lock yourself inside, it literally becomes a prison made of cement and iron. And you can't get out. You really can't. And outside, everybody's like, well, what's the problem? Like, you can just get out, but you can't. And and the only way that you can is if somebody reaches in and you are willing to have the help, if you can do that. And that's, I mean, I can see a lot of parallels in life and, addiction and stuff like that. That wasn't, I was really just seeing it as a fairy tale when I first saw it. But I'm really curious about this idea in our lives, is that when we have a persona, once we have a persona, like I'm trapped, how that then creates those things around us. Can it create, and what is the mechanism by which it then creates the conditions through which it can say, see, I'm trapped. See, look at that.
Yeah, all of these from a psychological point of view, these kinds of things get created and set in place unconsciously, meaning it's not like at some point in our life or when they begin, it's not like we decide this is what I'm going to do, but they're an unconscious defense. And they are a way that our primitive psyche, meaning our non rational, unconscious psyche, helps protect our sense of self and helps keep us intact. So I'm thinking about situations, and I'm thinking about years ago, sometimes when teenage girls got pregnant, they went to a home for pregnant girls. And I can remember talking with one woman who, had become pregnant at 16 and her parents dropped her off. And I can remember her talking about how alone she felt and how terrified she felt. And as she watched her parents drive away, she decided, I'm never going to need anybody, because she felt so abandoned. And that deep, deep wound arrow set in motion a kind of golden cage that became the cement, where she wasn't then able to let down and need other people. And we all need other people. So these things happen as defensive mechanisms to actually help us adapt and survive in the moment we are. And unfortunately, what helps us at one point in our life, what initially is the golden cage that gives us security, over time becomes the stone of cement and iron that we can't get out of, where we no longer feel secure, where we are left with our own terror alone. And we so badly want to be connected to someone else, but we're locked in. And it is, again, an unconscious mechanism that requires something from the outside, something conscious, someone else penetrate to help you get out.
It's interesting, because as I look at this and I'm thinking about this penetration and the character, her name is Althea, although she can be played by either a man or a woman. That's just who she thinks she is. In order to actually take the leap, she has to be pushed.
Mm-hmm.
And she begs to be pushed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm really curious. There's so much in the show. I mean, I wish people knew the show, because then we could talk about it. But in some ways, it's great to talk about it in abstract, because I think I'm assuming that many of us feel that we're trapped in something that we maybe even can't see, or it seems so obvious to us, but it is not to other people. It's like, well, I don't know, why don't you just do this? I mean, addiction is so much like that. Like,
Right.
why don't you just stop drinking? Why don't you just stop, eating more? Like, that's not the thing. There's way more there than anybody on the outside can see. And yet in isolation, we just dig deeper into that, which is exactly what happens to this character. And so this character is in a cage, which is made of cement and iron. The character on the outside sees it as a cage that's made of gold, easy to change. He pulls out one of the bars and he's like, see, like, I just pulled out one of the bars. So do you get it now? But she can't get that.
Mm-hmm.
She sees that he's lying to her and he's threatening her, and that this is a bar this is something that he's going to hit her with. That's how she perceives it at that moment. And so I guess I guess what am I? Oh, so once we're in that cage of perception. This is my life. This is who I am. This is what I'm capable of. And it becomes so much a part of us. We don't even see it anymore. What would be a step? Because I see what happened in the play. I can write it in a play. I can write it in a story and in a myth. But I see that I'm also living this in my life. And many people are living it in their lives. And they don't have a Birdman who comes and I don't know. I mean, and by the way, the Birdman has his whole other story. He's completely consumed by achievement, which traps him. So it's not like there's a savior here. They have to save each other. And we have to save each other. But why? I mean, I love that it's true. You said I think you said a minute ago, people need each other. Why?
Well, people need each other because there is this unconscious dynamic where we can get caught in a closed system that only knows a part of who we are. And in order to discover the other part, something has to come in from the outside, i.e., from other people. The other thing that happens, and I'm thinking about when people come into analysis or the people go to therapy or they start self-help programs. Most people who end up in a 12-step program, whether it's for alcoholism and drug addiction, or it's for obsessive compulsive behavior, or it's for overeating, whatever it is, usually start because at some moment in time, there's been an impulse in them of this is killing me.
Right.
I don't want this. This is keeping me from getting what I want.
Right.
And that impulse may quickly, I mean, it may be like this, the when you're trying to start a fire, it like flames up for 30 seconds and it goes away. So what often happens is there is someone in the outside world, friend, family member, therapist, 12-step sponsor, who then when that impulse is there, they say, okay, but there's that impulse. And they push or pull, whatever way you want to say it, push or pull us to fan that fire of that impulse so it grows, so that someone begins to identify with something else that is also inside of them, but that is outside of the defensive structure of identity they've built, or the defensive structure of a habit pattern, or the defensive structure of a belief. I love that your character is a birdman because birds symbolically are messengers between the heaven and the earth. They communicate between the world of our head and our intellect and our spiritual ideals and our body and our ability to take action and choose and have a different felt experience. And so often also what comes in from the outside is a symbolic birdman. You hear a podcast or you watch a Jung at HARP series or you read a book or you have a conversation with a friend and an idea that might apply to you, that you resonate with, that wakes up that spark inside of you. You hear it. And in that moment, it gets in.
It's really it's amazing that you're saying that because as I wrote and continue to write the show, I'm only I don't know these principles, but I'm just going on image. And one of the things that happens is that there is a feather that comes between the Birdman and the character in the cage, and that feather, which he is saying, don't leave now, we're just about to find it, and but the feather ends up, as he falls asleep, it ends up floating down and floating into her cage. And when she gets it, she just for a second says, I used to dream. I used to dream I was in flight. I used to dream of soaring on a starlit night. Now I only dream of dreaming. And that dream is never new. So she realizes that she's in this pattern. I wanted to go back, and I was really taken by this the switch of identity. And I know that one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that happens in 12 step is that you do, stop the, like, I'm not that. No, I'm okay. And then you're like, yeah, I'm an alcoholic.
Right.
Yes, I'm this. And that being able to let go of that. And that's what happens. Not spoiler alert, whatever, it doesn't matter. I mean, she does able to actually see who she is.
Mm-hmm.
And by seeing who she is, she's able then to save him, so that they are able to save each other from both the incredible hunger for achievement and the hiding in complete isolation. But they need each other to do that. And so, and I'm going to take just a look here to
Yeah.
see. Wait. Okay, this is great, and I love this. Okay, uh, Elizabeth is saying, what I find interesting is 20 people can tell you the same positive message, and the 21st person can say the same thing, and you have the aha moment. Agreed.
Yeah.
That I think I love that, because then it makes us ask, at what day are we open to that Birdman? How many Birdmen have flown by this and it didn't open up to us? The feather didn't fall off, or the feather came off and we didn't see it, or
Right.
and it makes me think that we are open to that. Something opens up in us somehow. And what I find interesting off this is, for me, it almost never happens with advice. It is almost always with somebody sharing their own story.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think part of the key is that the feather gets in, so to speak, symbolically, or we have the aha moment when we are feeling safe enough with ourselves and with whom, wherever the feather's coming from. And again, that's something that we can't create with our ego. It's a felt experience. So the advice, we don't feel safe with it, because often advice giving, we feel judged, we feel less than, we feel talked down to. Whereas if someone's sharing their experience, it's kind of like we're joining hands together, we're all in it together. And there's an equanimity and an acceptance and a shared human moment of meeting that makes the difference. And so it is interesting that, how do we hold, and I ask myself this question a lot, how do I hold an attitude of just being open to being receptive and present with myself and someone else? Because that is a piece of it. It's not just that the information or idea or the Birdman's out here, but it's somewhere there's a receptivity. My guess is that before this feather floats in, that there's already been a lot of exchange between Althea and Boris.
No, actually not.
Oh,
The feather is the first thing that connects them at
well, how,
all. And she has no idea what it is. I'm really taken by these two things,
yeah.
by the two things that you mentioned, which seem to be the way in, the way into the way out. And one you said was, when we hit a bottom, when we know, like, I'm like, and they say nobody dances into a 12-step program. You come in on your knees, and that's where you are. And then you're also talking about and then you find community, and then you come together and help each other. I mean, you do it together, but it's much deeper and more complex than that. But and then the other way is when we are receptive to something, whatever it is that comes in. And then it seems like there's a third way where we're like, gee, maybe I should have a therapist. Or I don't know what all these ways are,
Right.
but I'll bet you know something about that, because it seems like each one is slightly different.
Yeah, the one, and what you're describing in Jungian terminology, we would talk about as a numinous experience. It's like this feather floats into her cage, and she's had and it connects her with something in herself. There is, and from a Jungian perspective, our psyche, we have within us an innate instinctive drive to become more whole, to live all of the aspects of who we are and bring that into the world. Jungians very much believe that there's something in us that pushes us to live and embody and give expression to all aspects of ourself. And sometimes that push comes through what feels like a numinous or spiritual experience, where something from the outside that's meaningful to us just shows up. And there it is. And in this case, the feather just showed up, and there it was. And that connects her to her dreams. That connects her to something in herself, an impulse in herself that she had forgotten, that she had disconnected with. And that begins to help her focus on that impulse in a way that it starts to grow again.
I never knew that about this story. I love this. TNR, Joint Hirsch, are saying feathers are a sign of angelic presence.
Yeah.
Signs felt into feelings. Then we can process the feeling to manifest. And it's really funny because as I'm talking to the casting director and the set designer and the costume designer and the director, and I'm trying to describe what these bird people are, because at first they were like, oh, so they have bodies of birds, and I'm like, no, they're people. And then I was looking for images, and suddenly I was looking all over Pinterest, and I was like, I found these images of angels, and I was like, oh yeah, right, like that's what they're like. And then I found these images of fairies, and I was like, oh yeah, that's what they're like. They're bird people. That's I mean, I don't know, but I love this. But let me just ask for a second. This is probably for a whole other thing. What is an angel? Like, I mean, this guy is no angel. Um, but what is, I mean, there seems to be all kinds of religious connotations with an angel, and then there seems to be all kinds of other connotations with fairies about magical. But what about the ordinary, people who are like built like that?
That's a good question. I mean, again, different traditions have different explanations. For me, an angel is someone who connects me to something bigger than myself. And angels are sometimes four-legged furry creatures like my little dog. Sometimes they're people, and sometimes they're things like a feather, or I walk outside. Woodpeckers to me are always a visitation of the numinous, the divine. When I see woodpeckers, it for me feels like a blessing that says, there's something more here. Dig deeper, keep on digging, and drum, go with your own rhythm, your own drumming. And so I think there are lots of different definitions. And of course, the religious traditions have all kinds of elaborate systems of hierarchies. What I want to say, for me, from a psychological and spiritual perspective, is that they represent energies that are innate within us, but that our ego and we may not identify with at all. We may have no sense that there's a part of us that can fly, or that there's a part of us that might work magic with someone because we're there compassionately and lovingly.
As you're speaking this, I'm looking at our title, when we're not even talking about our title at this point, but I'm also thinking about all the things with wings. What are all the things with wings? And I suddenly, that poem, hope is the thing with wings that perches. I don't know the whole poem, but just like, what are, and when you started talking about angels, and I was thinking like, wow, this visitation by this bird thing is anything but angelic. It's silly and crass and manipulative and all kinds of things, and then ultimately redemptive, but not in any kind of religious way. And let's go back to this question, just because it's here, because this is what we started. Let me put my glasses on. When identity gets destroyed, what's created? And here's why we're even talking about angels, blah, 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 is because this story that I'm working on, that's going to open in New York on April 20th, that is about bird people, and and a golden cage that appears different on the inside and the outside. And at one point, one of the characters gets completely destroyed, and yet that is the moment when she finds out who she really is. But it is through absolute surrender to destruction. I mean, like when she says, I opened up my arms to embrace the end of everything. That's the moment. That's the moment. So my question when we, started talking this morning was, when our identity, and we've been talking about identity, when it gets destroyed, what gets created? What does that open up for us?
It opens up the opportunity for one to have a sense of self that's bigger and more complete and more fully embodies all of who they are. And their identity changes because once we have that experience of our ego ideal, who we think we are, and the way we have lived and our habits and day in, day out routines being completely destroyed, then what emerges is a new identity with new habits, new ideals, a new sense of self that is bigger, more comprehensive, more expansive, and more inclusive of all aspects of ourselves. And very much for people who come into my office, the angel that's gotten them there often has shown up not in the typical syrupy, sweet, desirable garb. I mean, often the visitations, the things that get us started on the path where we do surrender to this destruction of who we think we are to open up to who we really are in a more complete way, are things that are ugly and that are things that feel disrespectful and humiliating. And so, again, from an analytical psychology perspective, what we know is they're two sides of the same coin. that everything exists with its polar opposite, and what version we're getting is just one end of the continuum. But the energy is the same. The energy of a numinous visitation, whether it's one that feels hostile or one that feels loving and supportive, it's all on the same continuum of energy. But the garb it takes, it's kind of like one of my former massage therapists who's a friend who at some point changed her name from Diane to Deanna Scott to represent her inner children. She laughingly one day said, when I got it that my parents were God in drag, it made it a lot easier for me to accept them. And that's just a beautiful statement. And Deanna, if you happen to be listening, I know you're in Spain now. When she said that, what she was alluding to this kind of Boris character, that this doesn't look like a divine visitation at all. This looks like a tormentor, or it looks, I'm being extreme there.
No,
but,
yeah.
Yeah, it was God in drag. It's the angel in drag, so to speak, is the Boris kind of character. And when we can begin to move with that attitude, and the alchemist said this, I mean, Hermetic philosophy tells us that the divine, the primal will to good, the life-giving force is in everything. And so when we begin to embrace that attitude, then we realize, and I'm thinking, if my stomach is hurting, then maybe that's the angel organ. My stomach is an angel communicating something to me. And Rudolf Steiner, who was a contemporary of Jung, who started a system of thought called anthroposophy, he said that all of our organs are actually our guardian angels.
Wow.
So it's another whole way of thinking about the energy that the word angel and that all of the religious images actually hold. That, think about it, our organs, man, do they not take care of us all the time? And we don't even stop to think about it.
Right.
And it acknowledges again that even though we know we're physical and there are principles of matter and science, etc., about how things work, that ultimately the essence in them is the divine presence taking that form, taking care of us.
I love what you're saying about taking form, and I want to because because that's what happens also in the play The Golden Cage. There is a change when there is a change of form, and in both characters change form. I also want to just bring up what people are saying.
Yeah.
Butterflies are magical too. We're talking about, but of all the people who transform in the world, butterflies are like the drama queens of that. I mean that in the best possible way. The caterpillar butterfly thing, I mean, is just the epitome of that. Although maybe somebody else does it too. And then I also love how Shar is saying the energy of change is chaotic. And when we're stuck, it feels so threatening. And I'm our question again, and that's so beautiful. And our question again is, let me see that question again. I have to look at it. When identity gets destroyed, what gets created? And when our identity is actually imprisoning us, which is what I think happens I don't know. There's also magical stuff happening. So, but when this character has to be pushed, and I know I have to be pushed.
Mm-hmm.
I can't push myself, but I can beg others to push me, or I can put myself into situations and almost manipulate situations that allow me to then be pushed. Then it's incredibly chaotic and scary before the transformation.
Yeah, and part of the reasons we hold on to identities, even if that identity is killing us, so to speak, is because we do fear the change. And so I think what Shar is saying is important. And that's, again, back to that part of what we all need is safety. And when something happens, and sometimes, again, it is a numinous experience. There's something that penetrates from the outside that reconnects us to something in ourselves where we feel safe enough to say to someone, as your character does, push me out.
Right.
Before she says push me, something has penetrated her vis-a-vis the feather, and she has reconnected with an impulse and a desire that she wants to move towards, but she is still so frozen in her terror, she needs someone to push her or pull her. And of course, archetypally, all of these characters in your play, as well as other stories, represent parts of us.
Right.
Because sometimes there are energies in us that push us. And, all creatives have probably had that experience where all of a sudden it's as if you're taken over. Yes, you had this idea and impulse and you've been asking for it, but 3 weeks into it on, minimal sleep and realizing your diet's really gone out the window and all this, it's like you realize there's a force that's pulling you, that's carrying you, that our ego, our sense of self-identity would like to think we're in charge of, but we're not in charge of it.
Yeah, I love this. And I love what Elizabeth's saying. We love progress. We just don't want change.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, as I go and I look at this play and as I start to share this and other people can see it, sometimes I would go back and say, it's as though I tried to put these ideas into the play. And yet, in fact, I was just sort of putting into fantasy what I was experiencing in my own life and what does happen to us when the change that we've asked for finally happens. In this show, she's like, no, that's not what I meant. That's not at all what I meant. No, now I like it here. This is good. This is a good place. I like it. And I see that in my own life. I feel like this play has been a map of my life. And so, and I really am. That's why I brought this question today, because that's the part of the play I'm living now. And so if you, Kathleen, were going to give us one thing to do to be open to the transformation of our identity in the thing that we have said we want, and yet we tend to fight it with everything in us. What would you say is one thing that we can do to make ourselves more receptive to that numinous thing, that comes into our life and that opens up a hole that we can grab onto, in a sense, that takes us, because noumenon, my understanding of the word, is a thing in itself as separate from its physical, how it appears. And this is the word of my life. I found this word when I was about 14, and just it's shifted my whole life. And what's beautiful about it is that reality can shift in a numinous thing, because it can be anything when you get to the heart of it and what it is. So what would you say we can do to open ourselves up to whatever it is that will bring the thing that will allow us to transform to our true selves?
Yeah, have a practice of listening to what is going on inside of you. That practice might be journaling. That practice might be drawing mandalas. That practice might be sitting down at your instrument for a few minutes every day to express whatever you're feeling inside you can't put into words. It may be a meditation practice. It may be a spiritual practice, but have a practice that you do for a few minutes every day, or as often as you can, of listening to what's going on inside of you. Because when we're listening to what's going on inside of us and those symbolic feathers get in, then we're going to pick it up just like your character does, and it's going to connect us to something that's inside of us that we have lost connection to. And that is the thing that will help us move forward out of our cage.
That's beautiful. And I'm going to pull up this statement. TNR Joint Hirsch are saying there is a momentum that must turn towards where we're going. And what I'm hearing and what you just said, Kathleen, is that there is a momentum in our lives. And as we open up, as we do this practice, as we open up to something that may come in from the outside, that momentum's already there. And that can help turn towards where we're going, because we stop turning it in the way, no, this is who I am. 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 And we open it up. And then it allows us to actually transform into who we are. That's what I'm hoping.
Yes, yeah, it does, because we don't have to make up who we are. I know sometimes we think we do, but we don't. There is we all have an imprint that's our, if we want to call it our soul. There's an imprint that is uniquely Kathleen. There's an imprint that's uniquely DHC, that's uniquely TNR and Elizabeth and everyone who's here with us. And if we listen, then we begin to get to know aspects of ourselves that our ego and our persona have no idea about. Because these energies, they have to be mirrored to us. And how are they mirrored? They're mirrored through the outside world.
Right.
Whether it's our instrument, another person, a visitation with an angel.
Yeah. Or even part of an angel. Like
or part of an angel. Yeah.
And I just want to invite, the show opens April 20th. Tickets are going to go on sale soon. You can just go to goldencagemusical.com to learn more about this musical, and which is what we've been sort of talking about. And I am going to be talking about it for the next 2 months, because that is the project that I'm doing, that I've been working towards for many, many years. And Kathleen, it has been incredible to talk to you about this, because I see more about those characters and how my life parallels them, and what I can do and what they can do differently to open up to who they truly are. So thank you. This was a wonderful conversation. And thank you for everybody who joined us in the chat. And whether you put something in the chat or you were just thinking it in your head, thank you so much for being part of this conversation and this discovery. And we may not be here next week, because I know Kathleen has an exciting thing that she's doing, that she's working on. And you can find out more about that at Inner Divine Spirit.
Yeah, innerdivinespirit.com.
Okay, great. And but if we're not here next week, we'll be here the week after that. Thank you so much.